Good morning and welcome to all of you in this international webinar on Cooperation as a Way of Life, commemorating 150 years of the Paris Commune, an international webinar jointly organized by Department of Economics and Department of Political Science, Ramakrishna Mission, Vidyamandira, Belur, West Bengal, India. This is Professor Tomogno Mondol welcoming all of you in this special inaugural session. Today we have as our keynote speaker, Professor Richard Wolff. Warm welcome to Professor Wolff. We will start this session with Vedic chanting by our students Dibendu Ghosh and Aniruddha Ghosh. I'll request our student Dibendu Ghosh and Aniruddha Ghosh to start this program with Vedic chanting.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Punatu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Shanti Shanti Hari Om Shanno Mitra Shamvarunaha Shanno Bhavatvaryama Shanna Indro Bruhaspatihi Shanno Vishnurugramaha Namo Brahmane Namaste Vayo Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishyami Rudam Vadishyami Satyam Vadishyami Tanmamavadu Tadavaktaramavadu Avadu Mam Avadu Bhaktaram Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Bhadram Karnebhih Shrunuyama Devaah Bhadram Pashyemakshabhiryajatraah Sthirairangaistustuvagumsastanuभिः Vyashema Devahitayadayuः Swasti na Indro Vruddhasravaः Swasti nः Pusha Vishvavedaः Swasti nastarkshyo Arishnanemiः Swasti no Bruhaspatirdatatu Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Om Apyayantu Mamangani Vak Pranashchakshusrotramatho Valamindriyani Cha Sarvani Sarvam Brahmopanishadam Maham Brahma Nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakarot Manirakaranamastva Nirakaranamestu Tadatmani Nirate Yapanishassu Dharmaste Mai Santu Te Mai Santu Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ॐ तत्सत्। श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।
Thank you, Dibyendu Ghosh and Aniruddha Ghosh. Now, welcome address will be given by our revered Principal Maharaj of our college, that is Ramakrishna Mission Vidyamandira Belur, Swami Ekachittananda. I'll request our Principal Maharaj to give the welcome address.
Om Namo Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya. Respected Professor Richard D. Wolff, Professor Sir Chanting, other distinguished speakers of the session, respected heads and other faculty members of the departments of Economics and Pol Science of the Ramakrishna Mission Vidyamandira, for the co-hosts of this day-long webinar, and my dear students, and all those who have joined us this morning, wonderful morning. On behalf of Ramakrishna Mission Vidyamandira, as well as the departments of Economics and Political Science, I extend a most hearty welcome to all of you. This particular webinar, the theme of the webinar, assumes significance in the Ramakrishna Mission environment, given the fact that the mission, this organization, has been striving hard right from this points of inception to practice and propagate the idea of cooperation. Actually, to the Ramakrishna Mission, cooperation means oneness. Cooperation means the very solidarity of the universe. So Swami Vivekananda, the visionary behind this great institution, the Temple of Learning, Vidyamandira means Temple of Learning, he pointed out at the final session of the historic Chicago address that now onwards the motto of the new civilization should be help and not fight, assimilation and not destruction, harmony and peace and not dissension. Now, I would like to give a brief introduction to our college. Ramakrishna Mission Vidyamandira came into existence in 1941, exactly after 39 years of passing away of Swami Vivekananda, who himself coined the term Vidyamandira. And in 2010, the college was given autonomous status by the University Grants Commission of India. In the course of its 81 years of journey, Vidyamandira has acclaimed a number of rewards and acceptance at various levels. As I already mentioned, 2010, it was given the autonomous status by the UGC, which was renewed in 2016. And recently, very recently, the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, they have also accredited Vidyamandira with A++ grade, the topmost grade. Actually, it began in 2005. The first accreditation process was completed. 2013 again, Vidyamandira was given the topmost grade, and this year, fortunately, a few days back, we have completed the process. As per the National Institution Ranking Framework, Vidyamandira has been ranked 5th at the national level in the college category this year. Vidyamandira has got 14 distinguished departments running 14 undergraduate honors programs, 5 postgraduate programs, and 5 MPhil and PhD programs. It has got a research wing of its own named after the Swami Vivekananda Research Center. So we are fortunate that today distinguished speakers like Dr. Wolff, Dr. Kayatkan, and Shobhanlal Dattagupta and others, they are in the midst of us. We are sure that their discourses will be much enriching. Our students and research scholars who have joined us today will derive much benefit out of their kind presence and deliberation. Once again, on behalf of Vidyamandira, I welcome respected Dr. Wolff, Dr. Kayatkin, and all the associates. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj, once again. Now, the theme of the webinar will be presented by Professor Manush Ranjan Bhowmik, who is also the convener of this webinar. I'll request my colleague, Professor Manush Ranjan Bhowmik, to present the theme of this webinar.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present the theme. Paris Commune may be considered as a landmark event in the struggle for alternatives to capitalism. French Revolution created a hope for a better life among masses. If we follow the scholarship of that time, we observe the following. After the French Revolution, the promise of liberty, equality, and fraternity was not fulfilled under capitalism. Feudal oppression was just replaced by capitalist exploitation. The event of Paris Commune has hence happened in search of alternatives to capitalism. In Paris Commune, experimentation happened regarding deepening democracy in economic realm and deepening democracy in political realm. Yet, whenever Paris Commune is mentioned, people used to think it in terms of history. But for us, Paris Commune is not a thing of the past. Rather, it contained within itself ideas and experiences. Those are relevant for the present as well as for the future. Whenever we say the term Paris Commune, the very idea of commune connects us to the idea of socialism. Professor Richard Wolff, in his book Understanding Socialism, says, socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products, quote unquote. Hence, here our interest is not only for that historical event called Paris Commune, rather the present and future ramifications of the ideas such as commune, cooperation, collective endeavors in economic, cultural, and political spheres. All these are relevant for us. Let me list out a few themes and sub-themes which will be covered, and many more will be covered in this event. The idea of commune, past, present, and future, deepening democracy through decentralization, alternatives to capitalism, post-capital or non-capitalist perspectives, community economics, social and solidarity economies, counter-hegemonic praxis, issues regarding populism. Now let me, at last, without further ado, will go to Professor Ranjan Chakraborty for introduction. But before that, let me read out a quote from the book Understanding Marxism by Professor Richard Wolff. Quote, Marx's work can remind us that capitalism's proponents and celebrants often make the same mistake as the proponents and celebrants of slavery and feudalism before them. They imagine wishfully that their system is the end of history and that their preferred system is as good as it can ever be, that humankind cannot do better. Every single one of those people has been proven wrong. Why then believe people who tell us today that we can't do better than capitalism? Unquote. So, the reason for this quote is the following. This book has an excellent translation in Bengali, which is done by Sri Anirban Chattopadhyay and Professor Anjan Chakraborty. We are extremely privileged to have Professor Wolff, Sri Anirban Chattopadhyay and Professor Anjan Chakraborty with us in this event as speakers. We hope for enriching discussions from them. So, without wasting any more time, let me go to Professor Anjan Chakraborty. Let me call up Professor Anjan Chakraborty for introducing Professor Wolff. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. Good morning, and I'm supposed to introduce whom I consider one of the giant intellectuals, global intellectual today. But let me get on with the task. So there is an official introduction and there is a slightly unofficial introduction. So let me get over the official introduction first. Professor Richard Wolff did his BA from Harvard University, MA in Economics and History from Stanford University and Yale University, and PhD in Economics from Yale University. After teaching at Johns Hopkins University and City College, Pune, he joined University of Massachusetts Amherst and stayed there for over 30 years. He is presently Professor of Economics Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a visiting professor of graduate program in International Affairs of the New School, New York. He is the founder of Democracy at Work and a host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update, very popular. His latest book is The Sickness is the System When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, which can be found along with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. So that's a website, and Manush was referring to these books. But just to add a personal note, there is an earlier side of Richard Wolff. I think people should be also aware of it. So I add this personal note in this introduction by noting that Professor Wolff's connection to Kolkata is over 30 years. I don't remember exactly why, but as a student finishing master's degree in economics in University of Calcutta, we started interacting via exchange of letters, and I received one of his books from him as a gift. This is in 1990, 91, I forgot, 89, 90, somewhere during that period. During that period, he also started engaging with my teachers Ajit Chaudhary and Kollan Shandal. In the meantime, a conversation with me opened, which has since continued for the last 30 years over letters, emails, and a few in-person meetings. Not many, 2, 3. But he has always been responding to whatever conversation I tried to open up, which shows his interest, in what he desires to do, actually. I have no hesitation in saying that his gifted book he wrote with his lifetime co-author, late Stephen Resnick, Knowledge and Class, a Marxian critique of political economy, has been the most influential text of my adult life. I will also not hesitate to say that following the book, many more like me were forced to revisit their basic understanding of Marxism and in general of theory itself. His subsequent books, co-authored with Stephen Resnick, include Bringing It All Back Home, Class, Gender, and Power in the Modern Household with Harriet Fradd, new new departures in Marxian theory, class theory and history, capitalism and communism in the USSR. There have these also have influenced generations of thinkers. He and Professor Resnick together guided somewhere around 100 PhD students. I don't know the count, actually, but when I look around, it's somewhere close to that. And many more, many among them actually went on to become influential thinkers in their own right. Even my PhD supervisor, Stephen Kallenberg, was Richard Wolff's student. Together with his PhD students, he initiated the journal Rethinking Marxism in the 1980s, which has since transformed itself into one of the leading journals on Marxism and cutting edge theory in general. Personally, though, I was struck by, as I understand, one common thing running across Professor Wolff's lifetime work, and that is that all his questions, even the most abstract ones that he pursued, were political in nature. So that was something that really, has always uh, set him apart, in my opinion, from everything else in the world of academia that I have, everybody else in the world of academia that I have encountered. It was thus no surprise to me that following the economic crisis of 2008 and the ensuing social and political crisis of USA, which is ongoing, Professor Wolff has since taken the path of using all his developed insights for the task of consciousness reawakening of the US people. And indeed, if one accounts for the phenomenal success of democracy at work and the regular economic update, then we have to agree that the effect is widely felt even beyond the shores of United States. That, and because Paris Commune is the backdrop of this webinar, is why people have gathered here today at 6 o'clock in the morning to listen to Professor Wolff. With these words, I welcome Professor Wolff to deliver his lecture, The Paris Commune, Lessons for Today's Critique of Capitalism. Professor Wolff.
Thank you, all of you, for coming at this early hour. Thank you to all of you who helped prepare this opportunity for me to speak with you. I appreciate your generosity, your kindness, and your interest in the work. Before I begin, let me tell you something that is very important and is, in fact, a theme running through what I will have to say. The United States is now in a situation that I did not expect to see in my lifetime. That is, I knew from my studies of history that capitalism, like every other system, would be born, would evolve over time, and would eventually pass away. But I did not expect that I would live to see it. So you can imagine my surprise when the economic crash of 2008 and 9 shook the United States to its foundations. I do not hesitate to tell you that since that crash, since the years 2008 to 2010 or 11, the changes in this country far exceeded anything any of us, and I mean any of us, left wing, right wing, or in the middle, ever imagined could happen. Not only did those years and that crash set in motion the political upheaval surrounding the election of Donald Trump and all that it implied, it also shook the confidence of the United States in its dominant world position. And that confidence has been shaken repeatedly in the last dozen years, to the point where I am speaking to you now from a United States that is more divided than it has been in my lifetime, that is more open to a yearning for a better system than it has than ever before in my lifetime. And finally, that there is now a significant body of opinion in the United States, not just from the left, but across the spectrum, that the United States is no longer in a dominant world position, not economically, not politically, and perhaps militarily, but even that, after the defeats in Iraq and Afghanistan, even that is now in question. The changes in this country are so deep and so wide that it is an open question how long the capitalist system in the United States will be able to continue. Let me let that sink in, because I know it may surprise some of you. It has certainly surprised us how fast it goes. I remember wondering over the decades of the 1970s and 80s and 90s why history seemed to be moving so slowly. And I was reminded of a famous remark made by the Soviet leader Lenin when he was asked by some of his associates why no revolution had happened in Russia before 1917. Lenin's answer was this: for decades, nothing seems to happen. And then in a few weeks, decades happen. We are at that situation in the United States now. Okay, let me turn then to the theme of your webinar, the Paris Commune. It was an extraordinary period of time in France, and above all in its capital city, Paris. It is called the Paris Commune because that's where it happened. 70 days. 70 days is as long as it lasted. But it was an event that shook the world. There was no one who wrote a book with that title. It needed the Soviet Revolution in 1917 to have an American writer write a globally famous book about the Russian Revolution called 10 Days That Shook the World. The author of that, John Reed. That book could have been written and should have been written for the Paris Commune. And then it would have had the title 70 Days That Shook the World. Why is the French experience of this Paris Commune lasting only 70 days? Why is it so important? There are basically two fundamental reasons, and I'm going to go through them and then carry them forward into the present. The first reason, and probably the most important, has to do with the fact that never before had average working people who understood themselves to be average working people gotten together to overthrow the government, to inform the leaders of France and of Paris that as of tomorrow morning, you are not the leader anymore. We are. We, the collective working class of Paris, are now taking over the government of our community. And we're going to reorganize it not around the theme of capitalist competition, but instead around ancient themes of community and cooperation. This was an unheard of, unimaginable break in French and Parisian history and society. It is important to look at the second reason. The second reason it's important to look at the Paris Commune is because of its relationship to the French Revolution of 1789. In that revolution, French feudalism was overthrown. It had been dying slowly for the previous 2 centuries. But its final death came in the French Revolution of 1789. And that revolution was fought, on the one hand, by the old regime, what the French called Ancien Régime, the regime of Louis XIV and Louis XVI, and the absolute monarchies of late feudal France. On the other side was the revolution that included together, and this is crucial, 3 major players: the capitalist class of manufacturers, the capitalist class of bankers and merchants, and the emerging urban working class. Together, they made the revolution in Paris, and with rural peasants, the revolution around France. But they were all together the revolutionaries, the capitalists, the financiers, and the working class. And that was French history. Once the revolution succeeded, once the Napoleonic period was over, the new French society was celebrating the end of feudalism and the arrival of a capitalism led by the manufacturers and the bankers and the merchants, and with the participation of the working class that was emerging as the employees of the manufacturers and the merchants and the financiers. This is important because in the revolutions of 1848, but above all in the Paris Commune, the coalition, the alliance of manufacturers, bankers, merchants, and the working class was broken. It was, the Paris Commune was the announcement that those who had together made the revolution were now splitting. There was the French bourgeoisie and there was the French working class. The bourgeoisie was in power, and the working class made the decision that it could no longer accept the dominance of the bourgeois, the manufacturers, the merchants, and the bankers, that capitalist society had not delivered the promise. And the promise of the French Revolution, remember, liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood. And because that promise of the French Revolution had been broken, France was not a country of equality. France was not a country of brotherhood. And France was not a country of liberty. Remember, in the middle of the 19th century, which is what we're talking about, the great novels were things like Les Miserables, which is a story of inequality and injustice in which the bourgeois and the working class are fighting a profound battle. The Paris Commune brings that to an explosive conclusion. The working class goes in one direction, and the bourgeois class goes in another. And the crushing of the Paris Commune after 70 days, literally the execution of hundreds of the people called communards, and the exile to the Pacific Ocean islands of many more, was the bitter, violent revenge of the French bourgeoisie against the working class grabbing for power. The next importance of the French experience of the Paris Commune was that it taught deeply important lessons. By far, the most important lesson was that the working class can do it. In other words, the Paris Commune is the first time in France and perhaps anywhere that the working class in a large area, the whole of the Parisian center of France, it was the first time that the working class made a serious bid to become the ruling class, to overthrow the rule of the bourgeoisie, that they could dare to try, that they could dare to succeed, and that they could maintain their power for 70 days was an enormous achievement. On the other hand, that they could be crushed after 70 days was also an enormous defeat. It was an achievement and it was a defeat, not one or the other, both at the same time in the same experience. One of the achievements of Karl Marx, who was alive at the time of the Paris Commune, and who was in constant communication with his comrades, who included some of the leaders of the Paris Commune. Marx understood that this was an important experiment for the working class. It was a milestone. It was an important stage in the development of socialism, in the sense of a system organized, built, and fought for by the working class in its attempt to make a better society than the one they were living in under the bourgeois French Republic that came after the revolution. So for Marx, it was a great achievement and a great defeat. And what revolutionaries had to do, in Marx's judgment, and he wrote about this, so we have his thinking on the subject. Marx's argument was, capitalism is a system that is going to have all kinds of opportunities for revolutionary breakthrough. The Paris Commune is the first, but it will not be the last. And so here's what we must do. We must understand what was achieved and what was failed. And we have to learn so that the next time an opportunity to break out of capitalism comes, we will be better able to do it. We will make a better experiment. We will get closer to victory over the bourgeoisie. But that requires a ruthless honesty about our failures. What we did that was bad, what we didn't do that we should have done. And that's what Marx did. If you're not familiar with it, I can also tell you that a few years later, Lenin in Russia did the same thing. He studied the Paris Commune to draw the lessons for the opportunity that was emerging in Russia between the years 1905 and 1917. And he read carefully Marx's writings. And then Lenin wrote about the Paris Commune and about Marx's assessment in order to do what Marx had suggested, draw the lessons so that the next opportunity would be more successful. And the next opportunity was the Russian Revolution. And it lasted not 70 days, but 70 years, from 1917 basically to 1989. And in this situation, what we begin to understand is that the same logic that Marx and Lenin applied to the Paris Commune in their time, we are obliged, you and I, we must apply to the subsequent experiments built on what was learned from the Paris Commune to make further efforts. And what are the efforts or the experiments I'm talking about? Here they are: the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Western European experiments with social democracy in Scandinavia, but in much of Western Europe, Vietnam, Cuba, North Korea, and so on. These were all experiments more or less built on what happened in Russia, what happened in the Paris Commune. And in each case, more or less systematically, the effort was being made to draw the lessons of what succeeded and to draw the lessons of what failed. And for this activity, ideological one-sidedness is a disaster. This is not about celebrating the victory and pretending that there was no defeat. No, no, no. You have to face the mistakes, the dead ends, the horrors, the flaws, right alongside the achievements. And in the interest of time, I now want to do that with you. What were the lessons learned by the Commune, by the Russian Revolution, and by all the subsequent experiments right up to the present? Well, here's the first lesson that was learned and then had to be unlearned. The first lesson was that the implicit strategy of the Paris Commune was the strategy seize the state, that the revolutionary activity of the working class was to take state power and use that power then to make the social changes throughout the community. This focus on the state became a settled commitment of socialists pretty much over the last 100 years since the Russian Revolution, because the Russian Revolution also proceeded precisely from what was learned from the Paris Commune, namely that socialism meant you grab the state. You could debate whether you seize the state peacefully with elections, with the ballot, or with insurrection, revolution, with the bullet rather than the ballot. That debate has always agitated socialists. But notice the disagreement about how is not a disagreement about what your goal is: to seize state power. If you're a socialist party in Denmark, or if you're a revolutionary army in Eastern or Western China, it is seizing the state that is the legacy of the Paris Commune. In this seizing of the state, as it was done in Russia, as it was done in China, and in most of the experiments, however this was done, peacefully or violently or revolutionary or reform, whatever it is, in this struggle to give power to the state, we have to recognize that enormous advances were made for the idea of socialism. Just like the commune won things, so did the Russian and Chinese and all the other revolutions. They demonstrated that socialism could become a system, which until that time was not so clearly understood. Socialists were oppositions to capitalism, but replacing capitalism, that was an idea that had to find its own reality. And it did in Russia, in China, and in the other societies. They learned how to plan an economy. They learned how to coordinate inputs and outputs. They learned how to do it technically. They learned how to do it administratively. They learned many things. If you take the two extremes, the socialism of Scandinavia and Western Europe, where the government regulates, but all industry is left in the hands of private enterprises, that's one kind of socialism. If you look at the Soviet Union, where the government not only regulates, but it owns and operates industry, pretty much most of it, that's another idea of how to set up socialism. And then you have this remarkable experience of the People's Republic of China, which is halfway between. It isn't Russia because it allows a very large private capitalist sector, but it isn't Scandinavia because next to the private capitalist sector, they have a big state-owned and operated industrial sector. And on top of all of it, a very strong communist party and state apparatus. This complicated notion of socialism as organized from the state on down has been the legacy of that first move by the Paris Commune to seize political power in the city of Paris. And it has achieved much. At this point, and I'm speaking to you from New York City in the United States, at this point, the whole United States is in a complete turmoil, not only about the COVID virus, and not only about all of our social problems, but for the first time in a century, the United States has an actual serious economic competitor country. And it's a socialist country, namely China. And this is so new and so shocking that literally Mr. Obama, then Mr. Trump, and now Mr. Biden have no idea how to deal with this and are therefore dealing with it very poorly. I want to go back and continue the theme. Our task now is to look at all of the experiments since the Paris Commune in the way that Marx asked us to. What was achieved and what failed? And I want to conclude by focusing on that and what that lesson means in our time now. For me, looking at this situation, I see an enormous success and an enormous failure. And in this, I follow Marx and Lenin and everybody else who learned the lesson of what the Paris Commune needed from subsequent socialists. Here's what I see. The achievements are, in many ways, better societies. Societies much less unequal in the socialist world than they are in the capitalist world. I see different human relationships. I see different kinds of freedoms that are more meaningful to me. I see socialism having achieved levels of support for the mass of the population that are examples around the world. They have shown that it is possible to provide for your people basic food, clothing, housing, medical care, and education, something that capitalism never provided for all of its people and still can't do it to this day. Most of these kinds of programs that exist in parts of the capitalist world today were achieved by socialists putting enormous pressure on these capitalist countries. That's to the credit of what socialists advocated, but it's also to the credit of what socialists actually accomplished around the world in all of these experiments. And I could go on, but I want to turn, because it's so important, to the failures, to the flaws, to what we didn't do over the last century, over the last 150 years since the Paris Commune. We did not adequately criticize where a socialism focused on the state went wrong, went too far, made tragic mistakes. And the best way for me to get it across to you is to suggest, if you put enormous economic power and enormous political power into the hands of the state, you run the risk that that apparatus of the state will itself become a self-reproducing kind of structure over society. It will be tempted, this state apparatus, it will be tempted not to do what the socialists had hoped, namely transform the society beyond capitalism. It will be tempted instead to make an accommodation with capitalism, to continue a powerful socialist state in a compromise with the old private capitalist class structures. And this shouldn't surprise us, because in the transition from feudalism to capitalism, at least in Europe. The same thing happened. Early capitalist governments didn't carry through the revolution against feudalism. Instead, they made compromises with the feudals so that you would have a kind of mixed society, and the forward development to capitalism was stopped or at least slowed down. The same thing happened on the socialist side. The socialists who captured the government were not willing or able to make the social transition that government power had been acquired to do. Instead, they made a compromise. We can see it easily in Western Europe, where you have socialists in power in the government, but they don't even discuss taking the steps needed to end private capitalism in their industry, in their agriculture. They have a compromise. Socialists can now regularly win elections and they can govern, but the unspoken arrangement is you do not basically destroy or go beyond private capitalist enterprises. A perfect example is the elections in Germany last week. The number one political party in Germany today is the Socialist Party of Germany. It defeated the Conservative Party of Angela Merkel. But nothing fundamental in Germany is going to change. You will have a bit more socialism in the government, but they will not question, let alone change the basic capitalist structure of that country. And now, which may shock some of you, let me show you how pretty much the same exists in the People's Republic of China. There, the compromise was with a government seized by the Red Army, seized by Mao in the revolution of 1949. But their compromise took a different form. They compromised with the intrinsic class structure of capitalism. And they did that whether the enterprise they organized was a government-owned and operated enterprise or whether it was private. In both cases, they accepted the old capitalist division of the people involved in every enterprise, every factory, every office, and every store. A tiny group of people who own the enterprise, who are the board of directors if it's a corporation, controlling a vast army of employees. The division of the people making an enterprise into a controlling minority and a working majority, that's capitalism. That's what distinguishes capitalism from feudalism, because there it's not employers and employees, it's lords and serfs. That's what distinguishes it, capitalism, from slavery, where it is masters and slaves. The unique division of capitalism is employer-employee. And the People's Republic of China continues that inside state enterprises as well as inside private enterprises. It's made that accommodation, that compromise with the capitalism it had wanted to overthrow. You can even see the signs of it in the last few months, where Xi Jinping in China is worried that the inequality and all the other features of a employer-employee capitalism are showing up in China in ways that he thinks compromises and undercuts socialism. And I agree with him, although our analyses are a little different. Well, then, what would it mean? What would it mean not to make a compromise? What is the lesson we have to learn from the excessive focus of 100 years of socialism, really 150, all the way back to the Paris Commune? What is the lesson we have to learn about this focus on the state? The answer is it was never enough. To grab the state, whatever the method you use, is not what socialism requires. For there to be socialism, in the sense that you no longer have the employer-employee division, the way overcoming feudalism meant we don't have lords and serfs anymore, or we don't have masters and slaves anymore. The end of capitalism is we don't have employers and employees anymore. In order for that to happen, now that we can identify that this was a failure of the Commune, of the Russian and Chinese revolutions, they never went there. They never used state power to systematically change from an employer-employee capitalist system of production to something that would be closer to liberté, égalité, fraternité. The missing element is this. You have to change the organization of production. The workplace has to be radically transformed. If you don't do that, you reproduce inside your society the kind of division between the powerful and the powerless, between those with wealth and those without it. And those divisions undermine, in the end, even the support for the state takeover by socialists, which you may have achieved in your revolution. That's what happened in the Soviet Union. There has to be a recognition that the revolution cannot only happen at the macro level with the state, with who owns the property. It has to happen at the micro level at the same time. And if not at the same time, very soon. Because the radical democratization of the enterprise is the condition for socialism not to destroy itself at the state level. Just as the recognition of the transformation at the micro level requires the support of a state committed to doing that. So it's not either or. It's a question of attending to what was missing at the level of the Paris Commune and ever since. And what is that? It's the radical transformation of the enterprise, of the workplace. And I'm talking about its internal organization. The revolution has to happen there, or it is not secure anywhere. The socialist revolution that does not include the workplace is a revolution that will not succeed. It may last a long time, but it will not achieve what the desire for doing better than capitalism always represented at its core. And what would that mean? It would mean the end of the capitalist enterprise, the transformation of every factory, every office, every store into a community. Notice the similarity with the Paris Commune, a community, a democratic community where everyone who works in the enterprise has one equal vote to decide democratically what will be produced, what technology will be used, what the location of production will be, and what is done with the resources that are produced, with the wealth, with the output, with the revenue, however you define it. It is a democratically organized production process. That kind of democracy in the economic core is the condition for a genuine socialism at the social level. Or, to say the same thing another way, there's no political democracy without economic democracy. And there is no socialism worthy of the sacrifices made by the communards in 1871 and by all those who have responded to the crises of capitalism since. Learn the lesson. Socialism in the 21st century has to include the radical transformation of the workplace. Only then will we have learned the lessons that the Paris Commune can teach us, that the Russian and Chinese revolutions can teach us for those societies and for our own. And that is the task now. And let me bring it back to the beginning as I close. The crisis of capitalism today is extremely stark here in the United States. Let me give you just 2 or 3 indices of how critical the situation is. Number 1, the United States, one of the richest countries in the world, with one of the most developed medical systems, healthcare systems in the world, has just completely failed to cope with COVID-19. The population of the United States, roughly 330 million Americans, constitutes 4.5% of the world's people. But we have just crossed 700,000 deaths from COVID. That's about 20% of the world's fatalities from that disease. There is no excuse. There is no possible apology. This is a colossal failure of an economic system, U.S. capitalism, to do one of the most basic requirements of any economic system, namely to protect the health of its population, which the United States has failed to do. Let me give you another example. The 200 richest people in the United States together have more wealth than the bottom half of the population. We have returned to levels of inequality that we thought had been left behind in ancient Egypt, but they have returned. Modern capitalism, both in the world and in the United States, has produced a level of inequality that is intolerable. Huge majorities of the American people, in poll after poll, condemn the inequality that we have and indicate that it is intolerable. And finally, every 4 to 7 years, American capitalism crashes. Every 4 to 7 years. That's the average. Here in the 21st century, we had the crash in the year 2000, which we call here the dot-com crash. Then in 2008 and 9, we had what we call here the subprime mortgage crash. And then in February of 2020, we had what we now call the COVID crash. But please note, the crash began in February. COVID arrived in the United States in March. We've had 3 crashes in 21 years, every 4 to 7 years. This system cannot tolerate these disruptions every 4 to 7 years in the lives, in the jobs, in the income, in the education of millions of people. For many decades, we had survived our capitalism by forcing certain minorities to absorb the cost of economic downturns. Above all, African Americans, secondarily, Latino Americans, and finally, women. None of those groups is willing to continue to be the shock absorber of capitalism's instability. The system does not know where to turn. It cannot face or cope with its public health failure, with its economic inequality, with its economic instability. And on top of that, the last 3 wars that this country fought, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, were all major defeats for the United States, which no amount of denial can obscure. So we have a system that is in deep distress, having deep doubts about itself and its future. It is a time of enormous opportunity. For the first time in 75 years, people who call themselves socialists are being elected to the American Congress, to American state legislature, and so on. The signs are everywhere of capitalism's distress and socialism's emergence. The question is, can we learn the lessons of all of the earlier experiments to get beyond capitalism? Can we hold on to what they achieved in the way of social programs and government supports? And can we learn to do what they failed to do, which is to revolutionize the workplace? It will be, of course, the young people in your country and in mine who play the key role here. And I know about the young people here in the United States. I do not know the situation in your country. But here the young people are very angry, very upset. There are no jobs for them. There is no income for them because university is expensive. The students have to take enormous personal debts to get a degree which does not guarantee them a job. Their situation is extremely difficult. They want change. They want big change. And the old socialist program of electing somebody who sits in an office in Washington and makes good programs for you, that's not the big change they're looking for. But they would support a program that revolutionized the workplace, that guaranteed to everyone you will have a job, you will have an income, but you will be working in a new way. You will not just be an employee, because you will collectively be your own employer. You're going to be working in a cooperative, in a workplace that is organized like a community that takes its clue from that time back in 1871, when the working class referred to what it had achieved as the Paris Commune, as in community. That is a kind of socialism for the 21st century that can succeed. And that is the most powerful potential that I believe exists in the United States today for where the future lies. And it traces its origin all the way back to that remarkable step in the growth of socialism that was represented by the Paris Commune. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this was of some interest.
Thank you, Professor Richard Wolff, for your illuminating lecture. Now, to make the concluding remarks, I'll request my colleague, Professor Shaptoshipal, to say a few words. Professor Shaptoshipal.
Professor Richard D. Wolff, sir, we have no words to thanks. Speech and lecture and also discussion on Paris Commune is very well informative and also insightful, which occurred this event 150 years before. Relevance in today. So, sir, take my pronoun in favor of organizing committee today's international webinar. And also pranam my principal Maharaj, Swami Ekachittananda ji Maharaj, and also pranam my senior teacher, Anjan Chakraborty Mahasai, Anjan Chakraborty sir, and also welcome. Thanks to all participants in this seminar. We are closing the session now, and next session today 2:30 p.m. Okay.